Hello, everyone. It is good to be with you. I promised that I would make a recording, a little children's sermon using the resurrection eggs. We started working through the story of Jesus with the resurrection eggs during our midweek Lenten services when we were able to still gather together. And so because the pieces are so small, I wanted to record a separate video on my computer so that I could show those pieces to you real up close and personal. If you are interested in purchasing your own set of resurrection eggs, you can get them online. Unfortunately, many of the stores that have them in store are considered non-essential at this time and are not open, but they are a great way to teach the story of Easter to youngsters. There's items that you can play with, and there are different sets, different companies that make them. They're a little bit different, and most of them include some sort of a book to help you. So if you don't remember what each piece of the story means, you can read the book as you go together. So I have my set of resurrection eggs here, and we're going to go through them together. The story of Holy Week, the story of Christ coming into Jerusalem, being betrayed, denied, dying on the cross, and rising again for us. And that is what we celebrate this week during Holy Week. So I have our first egg. And in the first egg, we have a donkey, this little donkey, which reminds us of Palm Sunday, of Jesus riding into Jerusalem on a donkey. He didn't ride in on a horse or a tank or some big, powerful thing to remind everyone of how powerful he is. He came in humbly. Jesus came to Jerusalem as a servant. And we'll talk more about that here in just a minute, how Jesus was a servant. And while he was in Jerusalem, he hadn't been there very long. Judas went to the chief priests and he betrayed Jesus for 30 pieces of silver. And so he betrayed Jesus and they paid him. He went to the leaders, the religious leaders, and said, "How much will you give me if I betray Jesus? If I tell you where Jesus is, if I show you who he is?" And so they paid him in silver. The next part of the story, after Judas has been betrayed, the people gathered together. Jesus gathered with his disciples in an upper room for a meal. And at this meal, Jesus said words that we hear when we're able to be here in church together. We hear these every other Sunday about at Emmanuel. That in the night Jesus was betrayed, he took bread. He gave thanks, broke it, and gave it to his disciples, saying, "Take and eat. This is my body given for you." And then after supper, he took the cup, gave thanks, and gave it to his disciples, saying, "Take and drink. This is the new blood of the testament shed for you for the forgiveness of sin." And so this cup reminds us specifically of the forgiveness of sin that we have from Jesus. The next egg that we open is praying hands, because after Jesus had that meal with his disciples, he went into the garden called Gethsemane to pray. And he took his disciples with him and he prayed. And it was while he was in this garden that the rulers, the people that Judas had told on Jesus to, came to Jesus there and they arrested him. And while they were questioning Jesus, Peter kind of followed at a distance. But Jesus had told Peter, "When the rooster crows 3 times, by that time, when it crows in the morning, you will have denied knowing me 3 times. And as soon as the rooster crows, Peter remembers those words and he is heartbroken because he knows that he has denied knowing Jesus when Jesus needed him the most. The next egg has a crown of thorns in it, and this crown of thorns reminds us that Jesus is a new kind of king. Most kings, kind of like with the donkey, most kings ride big white horses or in powerful bulletproof cars, and they wear bright shiny crowns or really expensive clothes. But Jesus came, and on his head, instead of a crown of gold, instead of jewels, they put a crown of thorns on Jesus, and they mocked him. They made fun of him. They said, "Jesus, save yourself." They made fun of him, and Jesus wore this crown that hurt his head. It was very painful, and he wore that crown for you because he loves you so much. The next egg has a whip in it, a whip like they would have used when they whipped Jesus, because at first they weren't sure if the Pilate, the guy who had Jesus crucified, who gave the final order, thought maybe this would be enough if he just had Jesus whipped, but it hurt Jesus. It hurt his back. It put huge cuts in his back, and it hurt him. And it's very sad to think about how much Jesus hurts, but he did it because he loves you. He could have stopped it at any time, but he didn't, because he loves you. And so while Jesus was wearing that crown of thorns, and after they whipped him, they nailed Jesus to a cross. And so this cross is made out of 3 nails. And it reminds us again of this cross, this symbol that even though we see them all over and we don't even think much of it a lot of times, that the cross reminds us of God's love for us. And it was on that cross that Jesus died, that he was a servant, that he died there for you. And just to make sure that he had died, because it got really dark, Jesus died faster than a lot of people who were put on crosses died. And so the Roman soldiers took a spear and they put it in Jesus' side to make sure that he had died. And when they put the spear in, all of the water in Jesus' body came flowing out. And we know that Jesus is the living water. And so Jesus shed his blood and the water in his body for you. But after this spear had gone into Jesus, they knew that he was dead. And so it seems like that would be the end of a story. But it's not. It's not the end of the story. Jesus' story and your story does not end with death. And so the next piece in there is a white cloth, because that's what people wrapped bodies in. They didn't have caskets the way we do. And so a man named Joseph went to Pilate and asked, can we take Jesus' body and bury it properly? And so they wrapped Jesus' body in this nice cloth. And this cloth is going to be important again when we get to the end of the story. So they wrapped Jesus in the cloth. They put him in a tomb, in a cave in the side of a wall, and they rolled a huge stone in front of that. And they waited. 3 days they waited, and the stone was there. There were guards in front of the tomb to make sure that Jesus' body wasn't stolen. Because Jesus had said, I'm going to rise from the dead. And people were worried, well, maybe someone will move the body or steal it and just pretend that Jesus rose from the dead. But even though there was this big stone, even though there were guards in front of the tomb, on Easter morning, the tomb was empty. Jesus wasn't there. The only thing that was in the tomb was the clothes they had wrapped Jesus in, but they were folded up nice and neat. There was no body. The tomb was empty. Jesus is alive. He is risen for you. And so this week, as we think about all of these sad events that led up to Easter, even though it's kind of sad that we can't gather and we can't celebrate this together, we do gather even through our computers or our TVs, and we celebrate that the tomb is empty. And so on Sunday morning, I invite you to tune in on Facebook Live, on YouTube, on Channel 77 if you live in George, and join us as we open that box. Some of you might remember on Ash Wednesday, we took a box and we put a word in there. It starts with A, and remember it rhymes with Hallelujah. And so we put that word in the box, and on Sunday morning, on Easter morning, even though we can't be together, that word is going to break out and we're going to sing praises to God. Because even if we can't be together in person, Jesus is risen for you. Amen.